Hey, what's up, guys? It's Scar here from theScore eSports, here with Noah Whinston, the CEO of Immortals. I've been actually looking forward to this interview for a long time. Why don't you kind of tell us about yourself?
Sure. So until September of last year, I was a college student at Northwestern University in Illinois, and I had the opportunity to work with a few big LA area investors to create something that I had wanted to do for a while. So rather than returning for my senior year of college, I moved out to LA and started Immortals.
Isn't that kind of crazy though that right out of college, while you were in college, not they didn't wait for you to graduate. They decided that you would be the CEO. All these investors came together and essentially vouched for you. Like, what made you so special to them? Were your grades super good? Was your background really good? Like, what really stood out?
No, my grades sucked. My background before doing Immortals was in data-driven sports betting. So I used, for both traditional sports and esports, statistics and data analysis to predict games, identify strong players, that kind of stuff. And so when we started Immortals, that was kind of the same thing that I used to build this first iteration of the roster, to some extent at least. And I also have previous experience. After high school, I started a Magic the Gathering website and store, along with some others in Chicago, and that kind of gave me a bit more experience on the running the business side of things.
So does that mean, like, similar to sabermetrics, how you use statistics to determine the value of a baseball player, that you kind of found your players off using just raw data?
I'm not going to say just using raw data, right? Like, the whole point of sabermetrics is it's supposed to be used in addition to doing eye test and personality test, especially in League of Legends, where if someone has great stats and a terrible personality, they're not going to fit on your team. So I'm not going to claim that this is some sort of like magic formula where all of a sudden you can just build the best team. Instead, it's about how do you supplement normal metrics of analysis with data in order to craft a better system for analyzing players.
I have to ask, you are probably the only investor-driven team that's been able to be successful in the scene. So when everyone thinks about the big companies in the scene, they think of TSM, COG, kind of the old boys club, and somehow you guys got to get thrown in there. But I understand you guys came in like not in season one, not in season two, during the LCS in season four, I think. And so, what makes you stand out differently from teams like NRG, from other teams? Do you feel like it's the business decisions? Like, what really separates you guys?
Well, first off, we came in this season, so season 6.
Oh, wow.
Wow, we're a lot of seasons down the line,
Yeah.
Scar. So I think that what we did differently from day one is just kind of a more methodical, thoughtful approach, both to the competitive side and somewhat the business side. I want to take as little credit for that as possible, right? So one of the key things that I think was really important in how we built our roster is we actually hired our coaching staff first. So we hired our coaching staff well before we finished the roster, so then our coaching staff was heavily involved in the building of the roster from day one. I basically spent 2 months working full-time on just building the roster before LCS even started, and a huge part of that is how do you identify the players that are actually good, not just the players that Reddit says are good or that Twitter says is good. So that combination of really valuing the opinion of others who know a lot more than I do about eye testing and personalities, as well as rejecting all of the noise and social media buzz around certain players was really important towards how do we identify a team that isn't just a bunch of skilled players, but a bunch of skilled players that have the right personalities to mesh together.
So I have a really big question. So a lot of times, teams such as yours will run into problems, even though you're the best in the region. Let's say, you had the playoffs problem last split, and you had this split. People have looked to your draft and be like, "Oh, your draft's not very good." Do you, as a CEO, step in personally to look to solve that, or do you feel like you've already allotted like these guys the responsibility to do it, and it's their job to do that?
So it's absolutely their job to do that. But I will also say, though, that my goals as a CEO for this team, I don't try and put too much pressure on the players of the team, right? So first split of LCS, I said from day one, I'm happy if we're top 3. And just because we went on a 17-1 run doesn't mean that I get to then be unhappy when we finish third, right? So it's really important to me that the expectations I have of the players are fair and that they are consistent throughout the split, and expectations of my staff also. I'm sure there are areas for improvement. People on the internet can try and find those areas. I'm no expert analyst or expert coach, so it's not my job to say this draft is bad or this draft is good. But really important to the way we do this team is putting a lot of trust and faith and responsibility in each of the members of our players and staff, and that gets paid back to us, right? If you pay attention to us, there's no drama coming out of our team during the season. There's no Twitter fights that erupt. There's no massive arguments that leave people screaming at each other. We treat each other with respect, and we acknowledge that some members of the team are better at certain things, and we're all comfortable with that.
So what would you say is like the biggest thing about being the CEO? Would you think it's about establishing this procedural type of thing so that your team can now look toward each other for like trust, responsibility, all of that? Or do you feel like maybe there's a bigger picture thing and this is just one of the smaller things that you do?
Um, Frankly, like the competitive end of the team is just one part of what I do. But I view being a CEO really similarly to how I view being a head coach, right? So it's a head coach's job of a team to set up all of the structure, right? From top to bottom, what is our philosophy as a competitive roster? How do we work? Why do we work? And how do we interact with each other on a day-to-day basis? And I have to set that up not just on the competitive end, but for the entire company. What do we stand for? How do we execute on that vision?
We're now two splits down the line. Would you feel like do you feel like you guys are successful?
Well, we're not in relegations. So, given that my primary goal was in the first year, don't get relegated, so far so good. We're doing fine. We have a roster that's really strong. We've established a really good reputation among the player community about the way that we treat our players and staff. We have a brand that, it's not TSM or Cloud9, but it's not going to be in year one. It never will be in year one. But we're well on our way towards establishing ourselves as something more than just those new investors on the block.
Uh, are your investors happy with how you guys have been doing?
Yeah, I mean, some of our investors were at the game today, and I'm sure they would have preferred to see a win, but they kind of share the same philosophy as I do in terms of thinking about things holistically from a long-term perspective. It's not about winning one game. It's not about even winning one split. It's about how do you take this first year and have it serve as a foundation for building something bigger over the next 10.
Well, a lot of people will come in with that type of idea, but however, you see a lot of people in esports be like, well, it's really risky to make any kind of investment, especially in the League of Legends scene, because the next year within 1 year, you could just be out of the scene. You're not allowed to come back in. Even though you guys are so successful, would you advise people to invest in the scene still?
I think that investment in the scene needs to be done in kind of the same way that we entered, which is a very thoughtful and respectful way. Um, I've seen a lot of teams, has everyone, that come in, assume that just because they have money, they're going to be able to throw it around and do really well. And that doesn't work because if you spend money in a bad way, like it doesn't actually convert into competitive success, it doesn't convert into business success. And I think that actually, though people will say differently online, like the outside investor-funded organizations we have in the LCS, even though they're not performing as well competitively, are still making really big strides. Like, if you look at the LCS this year and the way that player treatment has evolved and the way that salaries have evolved and the way that teamwork and infrastructure have evolved, nobody would recognize this even just from last year, let alone from, 2-3 years ago back in LCS. So I think it's really important to remember that, like, sure, Echo Fox is playing pretty badly. They have a lot of losses. But they have a way better support staff infrastructure than any team did a year and a half ago. Like, sure, energy isn't looking that great. But that doesn't mean that they're not putting resources into much better things than teams have in the past. So I think it's really important to look at this industry and this scene and this game and this league, not in terms of just a win and loss record, but in terms of how far we've come. And I won't even say we, because I wasn't here 2 years ago, but how far esports and League of Legends has come just compared to a year and a half ago.
And just for my own curiosity's sake, what do you think is the biggest lesson you've learned while being in this scene?
Oh, wow. You sprung that one on me. You didn't tell me beforehand we were going to be covering that one. Okay, you have to answer that question first. Give me some time to think.
I have to answer my own question.
That's only fair, right?
I think the biggest lesson I've learned in League of Legends is, one, don't trust people too much, and two, it's always the hardest working people that end up on top. So I've seen talent come and go everywhere, but honestly, the people who work the hardest and even in rough situations where like their team's 0-20, but they're still working hard, are people that will eventually shine.
I think the lesson I've learned that's most important is actually really similar. So when I came in, I was like, man, this is so cool. I love esports, and I'm going to be around a lot of people that love esports. And honestly, like during my time as a CEO, I've seen a lot of people like applying for jobs with me that list loving esports on their resume. I've learned that it's a lot more valuable to be willing to put in the hours than it is to love what you're doing, right? And that's why the people that are at the top in esports, they love esports. But that doesn't make them work any less hard to get where they are. The Jacks and the Andys and the Steve Aronsets and the Hotshots of the world, right? they love esports. They could make a hell of a lot more money doing something else in another industry because they're really good at what they do. But the reason they're on top is because they combine that passion with actual hard work and execution on the goals that they get from that.
Is there any other message you want to give out to your fans? Any Immortals people who will eventually watch this, who will eventually become fans of you if they're not already?
I mean, I hope so. I still have less Twitter followers than our team mascot. But guess I would just ask all of you to obviously continue supporting the team. I want you to look at how far we've come, not us as Immortals, but us as an LCS and us as an industry. If you're one of the people that hates on teams because they're losing, stop doing that. But I really appreciate all of your support. Wouldn't be possible to be doing this without you. And the support of our sponsors has also been invaluable. Big props to them. So I appreciate all of you. We're going to continue performing for you. Can't promise we're going to win every game, but we're going to keep trying.
Well, from one of the hardest working people in esports, one of the best CEOs, I'm Scarra here from theScore eSports. You can find more content online on our mobile app. Thank you guys. Hope you guys have a nice day.